The Arizona sun beat down on Red Rock Market like a hammer on an anvil. August 12, 1886, Tuesday. The kind of day when smart men stayed in shade and only fools or desperate people walked the dusty streets under that merciless sky. James Harrigan was neither fool nor desperate, but he had 6 horses to sell and bills that wouldn't pay themselves. 39 years old, lean as a whip with eyes the color of storm clouds, and a Colt single-action army riding low on his hip. The gun wasn't for show. 3 years in Red Rock, and he'd never drawn it in anger, but every man in town knew the quiet horse trader could use it if he had to. They called him Flint, short for Harrigan, some said. Others claimed it was because striking him the wrong way sparked fire. The truth was simpler and more private, but James Harrigan kept his secrets locked tight as bullets in a chamber. He tied his horses to the hitching post outside Henderson's general store and leaned against the water trough, letting his gaze drift across the market chaos. Ranchers haggling over livestock prices, women in calico dresses picking through bolts of fabric, children weaving between legs like tumbleweeds caught in a dust devil, the usual Tuesday crowd, familiar faces, doing familiar business. Then he saw her, an Apache woman moving through the crowd with the kind of confidence that made men step aside without quite knowing why. She wore a buckskin dress decorated with intricate beadwork, turquoise and white, in patterns that caught the light. 2 thick black braids hung past her shoulders, but it was her eyes that stopped conversations mid-sentence. While other Indians in town kept their heads down, avoided trouble, moved like shadows, hoping not to be noticed. This woman met every gaze directly. Not challenging, not afraid, just present. Completely, utterly present. She carried woven baskets filled with pelts, good quality from what Flint could see. Fox and rabbit, maybe a coyote hide. She moved from stall to stall, trading with a calm authority that suggested she'd done this 100 times before and would do it 100 times more. Flint looked away. Not his business. He had horses to sell and a ranch that needed fixing. Whatever happened in the market today, whatever tensions simmered between white settlers and the Apache, who still called this territory home, none of it concerned him. He should have known better. Trouble has a way of finding men who think they can avoid it. 4 drunk miners stumbled out of the Silver Dollar Saloon, blinking in the bright sunlight like creatures unused today. Flint recognized the leader, Vincent Creed, youngest brother of Captain Isaiah Creed, who ran a private militia out near Devil's Canyon. Vincent had a reputation for being mean when sober and vicious when drunk. Right now, from the way he swayed and squinted, he was very drunk. Vincent spotted the Apache woman. His eyes narrowed. His friends gathered around him like vultures circling something wounded. They moved to intercept her, spreading out to block her path between 2 merchant stalls. Flint's hand drifted closer to his Colt. Still not his business. But his body knew something his mind hadn't accepted yet. Vincent's voice carried across the market loud and slurred. "Well, well, Indians selling our pelts. Everything you savages got you stole from honest white folk." The woman stopped. She didn't step back, didn't lower her eyes. She looked at Vincent Creed the way a person might look at a broken fence post, acknowledging its existence without granting it importance. Her voice when she spoke surprised everyone within earshot. Perfect English, no accent. Educated diction that belonged in a Boston drawing room, not a frontier market. "They're mine. I trapped them legally on open land. Would you like to see my territorial permit?" The question landed like a slap. Vincent's face flushed red. His friends shifted uncomfortably. An Indian woman with proper permits and better grammar than they had was not part of the natural order as they understood it. Vincent lurched forward. "Your permit, I'll show you what I think of your permit." He grabbed for her basket. What happened next took less than 3 seconds, but would be talked about in Red Rock for years. The Apache woman's hand moved with the kind of speed that comes from a lifetime of training. A knife appeared from somewhere in her dress, not brandished, not waved as a threat, simply there in her hand, an extension of her will. And then, with surgical precision, she drove it through Vincent Creed's outstretched hand. The scream that tore from Vincent's throat was the sound of a man who had never truly been hurt before, discovering what pain actually meant. Blood spurted. The knife pinned his hand to the wooden frame of the merchant stall behind him. For a moment, everyone in the market froze, shocked, into absolute stillness. Then Vincent's three friends went for their guns. Flint moved without thinking. His Winchester was in his hands before his conscious mind caught up with his body. The rifle crack echoed across the market like thunder. Vincent's revolver, half drawn from its holster, spun through the air and landed 20 feet away in a cloud of dust. The second shot came before the first echo faded. Dirt exploded between the boots of the nearest miner. He froze, hands still on his pistol grip, suddenly very aware of his own mortality. Flint's voice was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes men listen harder than they would to shouting. Next one goes in your knee, then your friend's knee, then the other knee. I can do this all day, boys. Question is whether you can walk away at the end of it. Vincent clutched his bleeding hand, his face twisted in a mixture of pain and rage and humiliation. You're dead, Harrigan. Dead, my brother's Captain Creed. You just signed your death warrant defending a savage. The Apache woman pulled her knife free in one smooth motion. She wiped the blade clean on a piece of cloth from her basket, her movements unhurried, almost casual. She collected her baskets and pelts without a word. As she passed Flint, she met his eyes once. He saw something in that gaze he couldn't quite name. Recognition, maybe, or calculation. Then she was gone, disappearing into the crowd as suddenly as she'd appeared. Flint picked up Vincent's revolver. He opened the cylinder and let the bullets drop into his palm one by one. Then he tossed the empty gun back at Vincent's feet. Tell your brother James Harrigan doesn't scare easy. Tell him if he's got a problem with what happened here today, he knows where to find me. The miners helped Vincent to his feet. Blood dripped through his fingers. His face had gone pale. You'll regret this, Harrigan. My brother doesn't forget, and he doesn't forgive. They stumbled away toward the doctor's office, leaving a trail of blood drops in the dust. The market slowly returned to its business, though people kept glancing at Flint with a mixture of respect and concern. He'd just made an enemy of the most dangerous man in the territory. Everyone knew it. Most thought he was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Flint wasn't sure which he was himself. He sold his horses for a fair price, collected his payment, and rode back to his ranch 5 miles outside town. The whole way he kept thinking about those eyes, the Apache woman who'd moved through that market like she owned it, who'd defended herself without hesitation, who'd looked at him with something that might have been approval or might have been dismissal, and he couldn't tell which bothered him more. The sun was setting when he reached his property, modest but well kept. A house he'd built with his own hands, corrals for the horses, a barn that needed some roof work but was solid otherwise, 3 years of sweat and isolation and trying to build something after everything had burned. He unsaddled his horse and was heading toward the house when he saw her. The Apache woman, standing by his corral fence. Winchester rifle cradled in her arms, not threatening just there, like she'd been waiting, like she had every right to be on his land uninvited. Flint's hand moved to his Colt, but he didn't draw. You're either very brave or very stupid tracking a man to his home. She didn't smile, but something shifted in her eyes, almost amusement. Neither, desperate. He moved closer carefully, watching her hands. The Winchester stayed across her arms, barrel pointed at the ground. Up close he could see details the market chaos had hidden. Lines around her eyes that spoke of weather and hardship. She wasn't a girl. A woman, maybe 30 years old. Strong shoulders, calloused hands. Someone who knew hard work and harder choices. You got a name? He asked. Dakota. It means friend to everyone. The way she said it suggested irony, like the name was a joke the universe had played on her. "Well, Dakota, I don't know what you think I owe you, but I've got no quarrel with your people. Did what needed doing in town, that's all." She studied him with those unsettling eyes. "I need you to father a child." The words hung in the air like gun smoke after a firefight. Flint's hand froze halfway to removing his hat. 5 seconds of absolute silence. A crow called somewhere in the distance. His horse nickered softly. The world kept turning, but time seemed to have stopped in the small space between them. "What? I need you to father a child with me." She said it the way another person might discuss the price of horses. Calm, direct, practical. As if she'd just proposed a business arrangement and was waiting for his counteroffer. Flint felt his brain trying to process words that didn't make sense in any configuration. "Lady, I'm not a breeding stallion." "No, you're better. You're a man who stands up when no one else will." She set her Winchester against the fence post, a gesture of trust or confidence, he couldn't tell which. "My people are dying, not in battle, not with honor, disappearing like smoke in wind. 2 years ago, 50 people, then 30, now 11. Something in her voice cracked on that last word, just barely, a hairline fracture in otherwise perfect control. She continued, "My eldest brother Nietzsche was our war chief. 4 months ago, cavalry ambushed our hunting party, killed him and 2 elders. My younger brother Cochise scouts far territories. He's gone months at a time. The men who remain are past 60 years old, too old to father children." She paused and her jaw tightened. "White men in town. They only want to use us and throw us away. But you, yesterday you could have stayed by your horses, safer, smarter, but you moved. That's the bloodline I need." Flint took off his hat and ran his hand through his hair. This had to be exhaustion, heat stroke. Some kind of waking dream brought on by too much sun and not enough water. "This is insane." "Practical," she corrected. "I asked about you. Traders talk. You live alone, no family. Came here 3 years ago with nothing. Never speak of your past." She tilted her head slightly. "You owe me a life debt. Vincent Creed would have killed me. This is how you repay it." Before Flint could respond, hoofbeats thundered up the road. Both of them turned. A rider emerged from the dust. 46 years old, weathered face, a doctor's bag secured to his saddle. He saw Dakota, and his hand went to his revolver. "Flint, you all right?" "I'm fine, Doc." Flint kept his eyes on Dakota. "This is I know who she is." Doc Morrison swung down from his horse, his hand still near his weapon. "Whole town's talking. The Indian who stabbed Vincent Creed and you taking her side." "Wasn't about sides," Flint said quietly. "About right and wrong." Doc Morrison studied them both. He and Flint had formed an unlikely friendship, 2 men running from ghosts, keeping each other's secrets. "Flint," Doc said carefully, concern thick in his voice, "Creed's militia is already talking. Says you're harboring a hostile. He's coming. Let him come. You can't fight 20 men, maybe 30, and they'll have Gatlings if Creed's serious. Then I'll die trying." Doc's eyes narrowed. He looked at Flint's face, really looked, and saw something there that made him sigh. "This is about Catherine, isn't it, and Emma?" Flint's fist clenched so hard his knuckles went white. Nobody speaks those names. The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. Dakota watched the exchange, filing away information, understanding without being told that she'd stumbled into pain that went deeper than anything that had happened in the market today. Finally she spoke. "I'll leave. I won't have his blood on my hands." "No." Flint's voice came out rough. He cleared his throat. "No, you stay. 90 days like you said. But not for that. Not yet. You want to save your people, I'll teach you to fight. Really fight. Guns, tactics, survival. After 90 days, if you still want this insane plan, we'll talk." Dakota studied him. "Agreed, but the child comes with me to my people when the time comes. That's my condition." Pain flickered through Flint's chest. Loss or anticipation of it, both maybe. "Agreed." They shook hands. Firm grip, calloused palm to calloused palm, a business deal. Nothing more. or so they both told themselves. Doc looked between them like they'd lost their minds. "You're serious, both of you." "Dead serious," Flint said. "Then you need to know something." Doc's face went grim. "Vincent isn't just some drunk miner. He's Captain Creed's youngest brother. And Creed's already gathering his militia. He's given you 72 hours to hand over the Apache woman, or he's burning this place to the ground with everyone in it." Flint looked at his ranch, the house he'd built, trying to create something after everything burned. The corrals, the barn, 3 years of work, 3 years of trying to forget. "Then we have 72 hours to get ready," he said quietly. "Flint, you're going to get yourself killed. Been trying to do that for 3 years, Doc. Drinking myself to death is slow. This will be faster." Doc was silent for a long moment. Then he pulled his rifle from its saddle holster and jacked around into the chamber. "Somebody's got to patch you idiots up when the shooting starts." Something almost like warmth flickered in Flint's chest. The first thing resembling hope he'd felt since the night his world burned. "You're in. I'm in. God help us all, I'm in." Dakota watched them both. Then she nodded, once sharp and decisive. "We should eat. Planning war on empty stomach is foolish." Flint almost smiled. Almost. "I cook better than I shoot. Come inside." The three of them walked toward the house as the last light faded from the Arizona sky. Behind them, the first stars appeared. Somewhere in the darkness, Captain Isaiah Creed was gathering his men. Somewhere else, an arsonist named Pike was drinking away memories of the fire he'd set 3 years ago. And in Red Rock tongues wagged about the quiet horse trader who'd taken the side of an Apache woman against Vincent Creed. The clock was ticking. 72 hours until everything changed. But for now, in the warm lamplight of James Harrigan's kitchen, 3 people who barely knew each other sat down to share a meal and began planning how to survive what was coming. The night passed slowly. None of them slept much. Flint gave Dakota the guest room, a small space with a narrow bed and a window facing east. Through his own window he watched her silhouette on the porch at 3 in the morning, sitting cross-legged, facing the direction where the sun would rise. Meditation or prayer, some Apache ritual he didn't understand but found himself respecting. Doc made coffee in the kitchen, strong and bitter enough to strip paint. When Flint joined him in the pre-dawn darkness, the older man pushed a cup across the table without a word. They sat in companionable silence, 2 men who'd learned that sometimes words just got in the way of understanding. "Want to tell me what you're really doing?" Doc asked finally, his voice quiet enough not to carry beyond the kitchen. Flint stared into his cup, watching steam curl up like smoke, like the smoke that had poured from his house 3 years ago. "I couldn't save them, Doc. Catherine Emma. Maybe I can save someone else. Or maybe you want to die fighting instead of drinking yourself to death." Flint didn't answer. Doc wasn't wrong. Dawn came like a promise or a threat, depending on how you looked at it. The sky turned from black to gray to gold, and with the light came heat that would build throughout the day until the land shimmered and breathing felt like inhaling fire. Flint walked outside to find Dakota already up checking her weapons with the methodical attention of someone who understood that survival depended on preparation. She'd laid out her arsenal on a blanket, a knife with an 8-inch blade, a smaller knife tucked in an ankle sheath, a bow and 20 arrows, a tomahawk with a steel head. No guns, not yet. "Day 1, Flint announced. "We start with what you know, then build on it." Dakota stood rolling her shoulders. She wore the same buckskin dress, but had wrapped her braids with leather cords, securing them close to her head. Ready for work. They walked to the open area behind the barn where Flint had set up targets. Bottles on fence posts, tin cans hung from wire, wooden planks leaning against hay bales, 50 yards of open ground between shooter and target. "Show me what you can do with a bow," he said. Dakota knocked an arrow without ceremony. Her stance was perfect. Feet shoulder-width apart, weight-balanced bow arm extended, drawing arm pulling back until her hand touched the corner of her mouth. She exhaled slowly and released. The arrow punched through the center bottle. Glass exploded. She had another arrow knocked before the pieces hit the ground. Second shot, third shot, fourth. 4 bottles, 4 hits. Clean, professional, deadly. Good, Flint said. Not praise, just acknowledgement of competence. Now try the rifle. He handed her the Winchester. She took it carefully, adjusting to the weight and balance. Her first shot missed the target by 2 feet. The second clipped the edge of a can but didn't knock it down. By the 10th shot, she'd hit 3 targets out of 10. "You're flinching," Flint said, moving to stand behind her, not touching, just close enough that she could feel his presence. "Before you pull the trigger, your body knows the recoil is coming and tries to protect you from it. I don't fear it. Your body does. Can't help it. Human nature, but you can train through it." He demonstrated the stance. "Plant your feet. Lean into the rifle. Don't pull away. The gun will kick. Accept it. Don't fight it." She adjusted her position, mimicking his form. "Now breathe. In through your nose, out through your mouth. Let half the breath out and hold. Between heartbeats, that's when you squeeze. Don't pull. Don't jerk. Squeeze smooth and steady like you're making a promise." Dakota sighted down the barrel, breathed. The rifle cracked, and a bottle exploded into fragments. "Better," Flint said. They worked through the morning heat. By noon her shoulder was bruised purple from the recoil, and her hands ached from gripping wood and steel. But she was hitting 6 targets out of 10. Progress. Not enough to survive what was coming, but a start. Doc emerged from the house carrying a medical bag. He'd been watching from the porch, and now he walked over with the careful steps of a man whose body remembered too many battlefields. "Want me to wrap that shoulder?" he asked Dakota. She looked at him with those unreadable eyes. Apache have endured worse pain for less important things. "Sure," Doc said easily, "but smart Apache also accept free medical care when it's offered." The corner of Dakota's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Your friend is funny." Flint checked the ammunition supply. "That's his only problem." Doc grinned. "Listen to him. Acts all serious, but I've seen him laugh. Once. Back in 1884. Lasted about 3 seconds before he remembered he was supposed to be miserable." Despite herself, Dakota did smile then, just for a moment. And Flint felt something loosen in his chest. When was the last time he'd heard laughter at his ranch? When was the last time anything had felt even remotely normal? The afternoon brought pistol training. Flint set up targets at 20 feet, close quarters distance, the kind of range where missing meant dying. He drew his Colt in one fluid motion so fast Dakota's eyes widened. The draw was muscle memory trained until thought didn't enter the equation. Body knew what to do before brain issued commands. He fired 3 times. 3 cans flew off their perches. "Winchester is for distance," he explained, holstering the weapon. "Colt is for when they get close, and they will get close. Creed's men aren't stupid. They'll try to rush us. Get inside rifle range where numbers matter more than accuracy." He handed her a Colt Peacemaker cylinder loaded with 5 rounds hammer on the empty chamber. "Feel the weight. Get used to it. This will save your life or get you killed. There's no middle ground with a pistol." By sunset, Dakota could hit man-sized targets at 20 feet. Not fast, not instinctive, but accurate enough to matter. Her hands were steady, her eyes calm. She'd killed before Flint realized. Maybe with bow and arrow, maybe with a knife. But she understood that moment when you point a weapon at another human being and make the choice to end their existence. That knowledge lived behind her eyes, cold and certain. As the sun dropped below the horizon, painting the sky, blood red and gold, Doc returned from town with a wagon full of supplies. He climbed down slowly, favoring his left leg, old war wound that ached in the heat. "Got news," he said, his voice grim. "Creed's recruiting. Word's spreading to Tucson and beyond. Offering $20 a day plus bonuses for any man willing to ride against you. That's good money in hard times. He'll have 30 men, maybe more, when he comes back." 30 against 3. The math was ugly. "Then we make this place a fortress," Flint said. They worked through the night by lamplight, knocked out the glass from the upper windows, creating firing positions that offered cover while allowing clear lines of sight. stacked grain sacks along the interior walls, makeshift armor against bullets, set water barrels at strategic points both for fighting fires and for drinking if they got pinned down. They moved furniture, creating crossfire zones where anyone entering would be exposed from multiple angles. Flint sketched in the dirt with a stick, showing them the tactics. Creed's cavalry trained. He'll try to surround us, cut off escape routes. Classic military doctrine. But cavalry tactics fail against fortified positions, not without heavy casualties. But what about Gatling guns? Doc asked the question none of them wanted to voice. Flint's face darkened. If Creed brings Gatlings, we're in real trouble. 400 rounds per minute. They'll tear through these walls like paper through wet tissue. We'd have maybe 2 minutes before the house collapsed around us. Dakota, who'd been quiet listening, finally spoke. Then we don't stay in the house. Both men looked at her. Underground, she said simply. My people fought conquistadors, Mexicans, Americans. 300 years we learned one thing. When the enemy has superior weapons, don't face them directly. Make them come where their weapons don't matter. Flint studied her with new respect. Go on. The root cellar. How big? 20 by 15 feet. Stone walls 3 feet thick. One entrance. Dakota nodded. That's our stronghold. Let them waste ammunition on the house. When they come inside to confirm kills, we're below. Narrow entrance. Can't use Gatling guns in confined space. They have to come through one at a time. Doc's eyes lit up with understanding. Like Thermopylae. 300 Spartans holding a narrow pass against 10,000 Persians. I don't know Spartans, Dakota said, but I know Apache warfare. Never fight the enemy's battle. Make them fight yours. Flint looked at her in the lamplight and saw not a desperate woman begging for help, but a warrior with tactical intelligence that came from generations of survival against overwhelming odds. Doc, you said she's smart. Just now figuring that out, Dakota's tone was dry enough to strike matches on. Despite everything, despite the clock ticking down to violence and probable death, Flint almost laughed. Almost. They spent the next hours preparing the cellar, cleared out old preserves and equipment, creating firing positions at the narrow entrance, rigged a false door that would collapse if forced, buying them precious seconds. Behind a shelf of canned goods, Flint showed them a tunnel he'd dug years ago. Emergency escape route. Paranoia from his Texas Ranger days when making enemies was part of the job description. Tunnel runs 40 feet, comes out in tall grass near the creek, he explained. If we get trapped below, if they smoke us out or bring fire, we go through here, one at a time, quick and quiet. They stocked the cellar with everything needed for a siege, food and water for 3 days, medical supplies, ammunition counted carefully, 420 rounds for the Winchesters, 180 for the Colts, 50 shells for Doc's shotgun, not enough for 30 men, but enough to make them pay dearly for every inch of ground. Near midnight, they gathered around the kitchen table one last time. Doc poured coffee, hands steady despite his age. Dakota cleaned her weapons with methodical precision. Flint stared at a map of his property, looking for weaknesses in their defense. Can I ask you something? Dakota said quietly. Flint glanced up. Depends. Why did you really help me in town? The truth. For a long moment, Flint said nothing. His hands moved automatically over his Colt, checking the cylinder, spinning it, checking again. Nervous habit from years of handling firearms. Finally, he set the gun down. My wife, Catherine, my daughter, Emma. They died in a fire 3 years ago. The words came out flat, emotionless. The only way he could say them without breaking. I was at a saloon, drunk, angry. We'd fought about money, bills we couldn't pay, dreams that weren't coming true fast enough. I said things, cruel things. Then I stormed out like a coward. His hand trembled slightly. When I came back, the house was burning. Nothing but flames and smoke and screaming. By the time I got inside, by the time I found them, it was too late. He picked up the Colt again, needing something to do with his hands. Fire marshal ruled it an accident. Oil lamp knocked over, but Catherine's brother Thomas Reed, he never believed it. Thinks I set the fire for the insurance money. $5,000. That's what they say my family was worth. You didn't do it, Dakota said with absolute certainty. How do you know? She leaned forward, her eyes fierce in the lamplight. Because a man who kills his family doesn't risk his life for strangers. You carry guilt, James Harrigan. Survivor's guilt. The weight of living when others died. But not killer's guilt. I know the difference. Something cracked open in Flint's chest. Some wall he'd built 3 years ago, mortared with whiskey and silence and self-hatred. For the first time since that night, he wondered if maybe, just maybe, he wasn't the monster Thomas Reed claimed he was. When I saw you in that market, Flint continued, voice rough, standing up to those men, refusing to back down, you reminded me of Catherine. She never surrendered either, not to anything. Not to poverty or prejudice or people who told her a woman couldn't own land, couldn't run business, couldn't be anything but quiet and obedient. Doc cleared his throat. For what it's worth, Flint, I knew Catherine. Good woman. Strong. She wouldn't want you dying for her memory. She'd want you living. Then I'll live through tomorrow, Flint said quietly. Maybe that's enough. They sat in silence after that, each lost in private thoughts. Outside, coyotes called to each other across the desert. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of sage and dust. Somewhere in the darkness, Captain Isaiah Creed was counting money and men preparing for war. And somewhere even farther away, a drunk arsonist named Pike was bragging about jobs he'd done for cash. Near 2 a.m, Dakota stood. I need to do something. Outside. Private. She walked into the darkness carrying materials Flint didn't recognize. Dried sage, flint, and steel. Green branches. He watched from the window as she built a small fire in the open area near the corral. Then, using the green branches to control the smoke, she created signals. Puffs rising into the night sky in a pattern. Short, short, long, short. Again. And again. When she came back inside, Flint asked, what was that smoke signal? My brother Cochise ranges far territories, but he knows to watch for my signs. If he's within 3 days' ride, he'll come. And if he's not, Dakota met his eyes. Then we fight with what we have. The hope in her voice was small, fragile as glass. Flint didn't have the heart to tell her that 3 days was longer than the 72 hours they'd been given. Creed would arrive long before any Apache reinforcements could possibly reach them. Dawn came too quickly and not quickly enough. The 3rd day of their 72 hours. Time flowing like water through cupped hands, impossible to hold, impossible to stop. They spent the morning fortifying, training, preparing. Dakota's shooting improved with each session. By noon she could hit 8 targets out of 10 with the rifle. Her pistol work was slower, but accuracy mattered more than speed. She learned to reload quickly, fingers finding cartridges by feel muscle memory building. Doc organized the medical station in the cellar corner. Clean cloths boiled water whiskey for disinfecting wounds and steadying nerves. Surgical tools laid out with precision. He'd done battlefield medicine at Fredericksburg and Antietam, places where the screaming never stopped and the blood flowed like rivers. He knew what was coming. The kinds of wounds bullets made. The way men cried for their mothers when the pain got too bad. The weight of deciding who might live and who was too far gone to save. Around mid-afternoon, a rider appeared on the road, single horse moving at a steady walk, white cloth tied to a stick held high. Parley flag. Flint grabbed his Winchester and moved to the porch. Doc and Dakota took positions at windows covering him. The rider stopped 50 yards out. Old man, maybe 68, with weathered skin the color of saddle leather and eyes that had seen too much to be surprised by anything. He wore a mix of white and Navajo clothing, straddling 2 worlds, the way some men learned to do if they wanted to survive in the territories. "Red Sky Walker," Flint called out. "You're a long way from town." "Heard about trouble coming," the old man replied. His voice carried clearly across the distance. "Brought supplies and information." Flint considered for a moment, then nodded. Come ahead. Slow. Red Sky walked his horse forward, hands visible, no weapons drawn. He dismounted at the porch and started unloading his saddlebags. Dried meat, extra water canteens, 2 boxes of rifle ammunition, a bundle of medical bandages. "Town's talking," Red Sky said as he worked. "Some folks say you're right to stand. Others say you're fools. Creed's got money and men. You've got principle and pride. In this world, money usually wins. Then why help us?" Flint asked. Red Sky looked at him with those ancient eyes. "Because sometimes the right thing matters more than the smart thing, and because Catherine Harrigan was my friend." The name hit Flint like a physical blow. He hadn't heard anyone speak it with kindness in 3 years, just accusations and suspicion and Thomas Reed's hatred. "She sold me horses," Red Sky continued. "Fair prices, never cheated, good woman, treated everyone equal whether they were white or Indian or Mexican or black. World needs more people like that, fewer people like Creed." He paused. "If Creed killed her like some folks are starting to whisper, then he needs to answer for it, law or no law." Dakota emerged from the house. Red Sky saw her, and his expression shifted to surprise, then recognition, then respect. He spoke in Apache too fast for Flint to follow. Dakota responded, her voice soft with something that might have been grief or gratitude. "Your father was a good man," Red Sky said in English, switching back for Flint's benefit. "Nietzsche spoke truth and walked with honor. I'm sorry the cavalry took him from us." He placed his hand on Dakota's head in a gesture that was clearly a blessing, spoke words in Apache that made her eyes glisten. Then he turned back to Flint. "I can't promise militia. Too many men in Red Rock are scared of Creed or on his payroll, but I can promise witnesses. After the smoke clears, after the shooting stops, people will remember what happened here. They'll testify if it comes to trial. Justice delayed isn't justice denied if someone remembers." "Thank you," Flint said simply. Red Sky climbed back on his horse. Before riding away, he looked at all 3 of them standing together on that porch. White man, Apache woman, aging doctor. Unlikely alliance against overwhelming odds. "Fight well," he said. "Die better if you must, but try not to die at all. This territory needs witnesses to what's coming. Needs people who remember that not everyone bent the knee to men like Isaiah Creed." He rode off into the heat shimmer, leaving them with supplies and something more valuable than bullets. Hope. Small and fragile, but real. That night, the last night before the 72 hours expired, they made final preparations, checked weapons one more time, secured the cellar entrance, set 3 dynamite sticks with pressure triggers along the approach routes to the house, buried shallow enough that a horse's weight would set them off. Ugly weapons, but desperation made men practical. Near midnight, Flint stepped outside for air. The heat hadn't broken despite the darkness. He stood on the porch looking at stars that blazed in the desert sky like promises or lies depending on your faith. Dakota joined him. She'd washed the dust from her face and rebraided her hair. In the starlight, she looked younger, less like a warrior, more like what she might have been if the world had been kinder. "Tomorrow we might die," she said quietly. "Probably will. I don't want to die with regrets. Don't want my people to die forgotten." They stood in silence. Somewhere a nightbird called. The wind moved through sage, making whispers that sounded almost like voices. Dakota's hand found his. Her palm was warm and rough with calluses. "The child I asked for. It's not just about bloodline. It's about hope. About saying we were here. We mattered. We continue." Flint turned to look at her. Really look at her. Not Apache woman, not tactical ally, not desperate stranger, just Dakota, person, warrior. Someone choosing life in the face of death, refusing to surrender, even when surrender would be easier. "If we survive tomorrow," he started. "When we survive," she corrected. "Apache don't plan to die." Despite everything, he almost smiled. "When we survive, I'll give you that child, not because of debt, because you deserve a future, Your people deserve a future. And you, what do you deserve, James Harrigan? He looked back at the stars, thought about Catherine and Emma, about 3 years of guilt and whiskey, about the man he'd been and the man he'd become. I deserve nothing, but maybe I can earn something. She squeezed his hand once, then let go. Teach me an Apache prayer, she said. For tomorrow. She spoke words he didn't understand, but repeated carefully. The sounds felt strange in his mouth, foreign, yet somehow right. Ancient language carried on the voices of the dying, kept alive by the stubborn refusal to be forgotten. She told him the translation. Let me die in battle, not in bed. Let my enemies know I was here. They stood together under those infinite stars, two people from different worlds preparing to stand against a common darkness, not lovers, not yet, but something deeper than simple alliance, something that might, if they lived, become something more. The clock ticked toward dawn, toward creed, toward the moment when words ended and bullets spoke. In the house behind them, Doc Morrison slept fitfully, dreaming of Fredericksburg. On the road from town, Captain Isaiah Creed gathered his forces, and somewhere in the darkness, smoke signals drifted on the wind, carrying messages only Apache eyes could read. The siege was coming. Dawn broke on the fourth day like a warning written in gold and crimson across the eastern sky. The kind of sunrise that made men think about mortality and whether they'd see another one. Flint woke before first light, as he had every morning since Catherine died, pulled from sleep by dreams he couldn't quite remember, but knew were filled with fire and screaming. He found Dakota already awake, sitting cross-legged on the porch, facing the direction where her smoke signals had disappeared into the night. Her eyes were closed lips, moving in silent prayer or meditation. He didn't interrupt. Whatever gods she spoke to, whatever spirits she called upon, she would need them today. Doc was in the kitchen, making coffee strong enough to resurrect the dead. The old surgeon's hands were steady as always, but Flint noticed the way he kept glancing at his medical bag, mentally cataloging supplies, preparing for the worst. Sleep at all? Flint asked. Some. Dreamed about Antietam. Woke up smelling blood. Doc poured 2 cups, pushed one across the table. That ever go away? The dreams? Not in my experience. They drank in silence. Outside, the sky lightened incrementally, darkness retreating before the inevitable advance of day. Somewhere out there, Creed's militia was saddling horses, checking weapons, preparing to ride. The 72 hours were up. The reckoning was at hand. But the morning brought something unexpected. Not death, not violence. Instead, around 8 o'clock, when the sun had climbed high enough to burn, a single rider appeared on the road from town. Not Creed's militia. Just one man on a tired horse, moving slowly, a white flag tied to a rifle barrel held high above his head. Flint grabbed his Winchester and moved to the front window. Dakota took position at the east window, Doc at the west. They'd drilled this, knew their fields of fire, their angles, their responsibilities. That's Thomas Reed, Doc said, his voice tight with surprise and concern. Flint's blood went cold. Thomas Reed. Catherine's older brother, the man who'd spent 3 years hunting him across 2 territories, convinced that Flint had murdered his sister and niece for insurance money. The man whose face appeared in Flint's nightmares almost as often as the fire itself. Could be a trap, Dakota said quietly. Working with Creed. Or he's come to kill me himself. Flint's finger moved to the trigger. Either way, he doesn't get close enough to matter. Flint, Thomas's voice cracked across the morning air. I need to talk. It's about Catherine. Flint's hand tightened on the Winchester so hard the wood groaned. Don't you speak her name? You lost that right when you made her a lie to justify your hatred. Please, I was wrong. God help me, I was wrong about everything. The desperation in Thomas's voice was real, raw. The sound of a man who discovered that the foundation his entire world was built on had been constructed from false assumptions and wishful thinking. Doc put his hand on Flint's shoulder. Hear him out. He's unarmed. If it's a trap, we'll see it coming. Slowly fighting every instinct that screamed at him to pull the trigger and end 3 years of being hunted, Flint lowered the rifle. "Come ahead, hands where I can see them. You reach for anything that even looks like a weapon, I'll kill you where you stand." Thomas dismounted and walked forward on foot, hands raised high. As he got closer, Flint could see the toll the years had taken. Thomas was 42, but looked 60, gaunt and unshaven, clothes dusty from hard travel. His eyes were red-rimmed, crying or drinking or both. Grief and obsession had aged him prematurely, carved lines into his face that shouldn't have been there for another 2 decades. He stopped at the porch steps. Up close, Flint could smell whiskey on his breath, see the tremor in his hands, the sweat staining his clothes. This was a man who'd forgotten how to sleep, forgotten everything except the single purpose that had driven him across 2 territories, a man barely holding himself together. "I tracked down a drifter 2 weeks ago," Thomas said without preamble. "Colorado Springs, man named Pike. He was drunk bragging about jobs he'd done, arson for hire." Flint felt the world tilt slightly. Doc moved closer, listening intently. Dakota remained at her window, watching the road for signs. This was a distraction. Thomas continued, words tumbling out like he'd been holding them back for so long that now they couldn't be stopped. "Pike said he worked for a captain. Captain wanted land near Silver Creek for mining rights, silver deposits, small vein but valuable. Lady owner refused to sell, so the captain paid Pike $500 to burn her out." Silver Creek. That's where Catherine's land had been. The 40 acres she'd inherited from her father, the land she'd refused to sell, despite a dozen offers, despite the pressure, despite everything. Pike described the house. Thomas's voice broke. Described Catherine. Said she had red hair and fought like hell when the smoke started. Said there was a little girl. Said he didn't know about the girl until it was too late, until the fire was too big to stop, even if he'd wanted to. Tears ran down Thomas's face. He made no effort to wipe them away. Said the captain told him to make it look like an accident. Oil lamp. Make it look like the drunk husband knocked it over in a rage and fled. Perfect scapegoat. What captain? Flint's voice came out dead, emotionless. The tone of a man bracing for confirmation of something he'd suspected but hadn't dared to believe. Thomas reached into his jacket slowly, carefully, and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Isaiah Creed, former 7th Cavalry. Pike showed me this letter. Creed's handwriting. Creed's signature. Contract for the job." He held it out. Flint took it with hands that had started to shake, unfolded it, read words written in neat, precise script, professional, businesslike, cold as winter steel. Job completed as discussed. Payment upon confirmation of sale. Property transferred to designated proxy at auction. Expect full extraction of silver deposits within 18 months. Well done. I, Creed. The signature at the bottom matched the signature on a dozen territorial documents Flint had seen around Red Rock. Official papers, legal documents. The signature of a respected man, the signature of the man who'd murdered his family. Flint read it 3 times. Each time the words burned themselves deeper into his brain. Each time 3 years of guilt and self-hatred, and wondering if maybe Thomas had been right. Maybe he had been drunk enough to set that fire. Maybe he was a murderer after all. Each of those thoughts shattered like glass under a hammer. "He bought the land," Thomas said quietly, "after the fire. Proxy name, dummy corporation, but I tracked it back to him. Paid $200 at auction. Made $50,000 off the silver since then. Your wife and daughter died so Isaiah Creed could get rich." Silence fell across the ranch like a physical weight. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Doc took the letter, read it, his face going pale. Jesus Christ. Dakota watched from her window, understanding without needing the details translated. She'd seen enough injustice in her life to recognize its shape. Flint looked at Thomas. 3 years this man had hunted him. 3 years of hatred, accusations, wanted posters, close calls in towns where strangers recognized his face. 3 years of running. "Why?" Flint asked. Just that one word. Why are you telling me this? Why now? Why did it take 3 years to find the truth? Thomas's legs gave out. He sat down hard on the porch steps, put his face in his hands. Because I loved my sister. Because I needed someone to blame. Because believing you did it was easier than accepting that sometimes evil just happens to good people for no reason except greed. He looked up, eyes red and haunted. I'm sorry, brother. God, I'm so sorry. I should have believed you, should have investigated, should have been the brother Catherine deserved instead of the vengeful fool I became. Flint felt something fundamental shift inside his chest, like a bone that had healed wrong for 3 years, suddenly breaking and resetting into proper alignment. It hurt. God, it hurt worse than the guilt had. But it was a clean pain, honest pain, the kind that meant healing might actually be possible. He extended his hand. Thomas stared at it like he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. Then slowly he gripped it, hard, desperate. The handshake of 2 men who'd lost everything and found something small but precious in the wreckage. Not forgiveness exactly. Something more complicated. Understanding. Shared grief. The beginning of a path forward. Help me kill him, Thomas said simply. Help me make this right. Before Flint could answer, Dakota's voice cut through the moment. Riders? Many riders from the north. They all turned. On the horizon dust rose like smoke. Not natural wind patterns, the dust of horses. Many horses, moving fast. Creed was coming. Doc grabbed the spyglass from the window ledge and focused on the approaching cloud. His face went grim. 30 riders, maybe more. 2 wagons. Supplies, Flint asked. Worse, each wagon's carrying a Gatling gun. The words hit like physical blows. Gatling guns, 400 rounds per minute. 2 guns meant 800 rounds per minute. Enough firepower to tear the ranch house into kindling in under 5 minutes. Enough to make their carefully prepared defenses meaningless. Cellar, Flint said. Now, everyone. They moved with practiced efficiency, grabbing weapons and ammunition, heading for the root cellar entrance. Thomas followed without question, understanding that explanations would come later, survival came first. But they had 5 minutes before Creed arrived. 5 minutes to prepare. 5 minutes to shift from defense to the desperate gambit Dakota had proposed. Flint pulled Thomas aside as the others descended into the cellar. You know Creed's tactics. You've ridden with him. Before I knew what he was, yes. Will he negotiate, try to talk first? Thomas shook his head. Not anymore. Not after what happened in town. You embarrassed him. Made him look weak in front of his men. He'll want to make an example. Show everyone what happens to people who defy Isaiah Creed. So he'll attack immediately. He'll make a speech first. Creed loves speeches, loves the sound of his own voice justifying whatever evil he's about to commit. But after the speech, yes, he'll open fire. Flint nodded. That gave them one advantage. Time to get into position. Time to spring the trap. They descended into the cellar. The space felt smaller with 4 people instead of 3. Thomas looked around, taking in the fortified entrance, the escape tunnel, the stockpiled supplies. You've been preparing. 72 hours, Flint said. We knew he was coming. And you're going to try to hold this position against 30 men and 2 Gatling guns. Thomas looked at them like they'd lost their minds. That's suicide. We're not holding it, Dakota said calmly. We're baiting it. She explained the strategy. Let Creed waste ammunition on the house. Let him think they were pinned inside, dying in the hail of bullets. When he sent men to confirm the kills, use the narrow cellar entrance as a choke point. 1 man at a time. Pick them off. When the numbers were whittled down, use the escape tunnel to flank from behind. Thomas listened, and despite everything, despite the desperation of their situation, he smiled. Apache warfare. I should have known. Your sister would have understood, Dakota said. It wasn't a question. Catherine would have loved you, Thomas said softly. She always said the Apache were the only people in this territory with the courage to stand up to men like Creed. Outside, the sound of horses grew louder. Many horses, The thunder of hooves that meant death was riding toward them with military precision. They took positions. Flint at the center of the cellar entrance, Winchester loaded and ready. Dakota to his left, her rifle resting on a sandbag they'd positioned yesterday. Doc to the right, with his shotgun. Thomas behind them, 2 pistols and boxes of ammunition, ready to reload and pass weapons forward as needed. Through the narrow cellar entrance, they could see shadows moving in the house above, could hear boots on floorboards. Then sunlight as the front door burst open. Captain Isaiah Creed's voice boomed through the morning air. "James Harrigan, your time is up. Send out the Apache woman, and maybe you get to live another day." Flint moved to the cellar stairs, positioned himself where he could shout back without exposing his position. "You murdered my family, Creed." Silence, complete and absolute. Even the horses seemed to stop stamping. Flint continued, voice carrying with perfect clarity. "Catherine Harrigan, Silver Creek, Colorado. You hired an arsonist named Pike to burn her out because she wouldn't sell, because 40 acres of silver deposits were worth more to you than 2 innocent lives." Murmurs rippled through Creed's militia. Men who'd signed up thinking they were hunting a criminal, enforcing justice, suddenly hearing accusations that suggested their employer might be the real criminal. "That's insane." Creed's voice had lost some of its certainty. "Grief has broken your mind, Harrigan. I have your letter." Thomas Reed stepped into view, holding the paper high. "Your signature. Your confession." Pike talked before he drank himself to death. "We have proof." More murmurs, louder now. Several militia members exchanged glances. This wasn't what they'd signed up for. Fighting Apache raiders was one thing. Helping a murderer cover up his crimes was something else entirely. Creed realized he was losing control, losing the moral high ground that made good men willing to kill for him. His voice turned sharp, angry. "Lies, all of it. That letter's a forgery. And even if it wasn't, you think I'd let it matter? I wanted to give you a chance, Harrigan. Wanted to be merciful, but not anymore." He turned to his men, voice rising to a shout. "Gatling guns, fire!" The world exploded into sound and fury. 800 rounds per minute. The roar was deafening, overwhelming, like standing inside thunder. The ranch house above them disintegrated. Wood splintered, glass shattered. Support beams cracked. The second floor collapsed into the first in a cascade of destruction that sounded like the end of the world. In the cellar they huddled against the stone walls, hands over ears, feeling the vibrations through the ground itself. Dust rained down through gaps in the floorboards, the air filled with the smell of gun smoke and pulverized wood. Dakota's lips moved in silent prayer. Thomas's face had gone white. Doc's hands gripped his shotgun like it was the only solid thing in a universe gone mad. And Flint thought about Catherine, about Emma, about a fire 3 years ago, and a man who'd killed them for money and was now trying to kill again to protect his secret. The Gatling guns fired for 5 minutes that felt like 5 hours. Then finally, mercifully, silence. Creed's voice distant through the ringing in their ears. "Cease fire. Check the house for bodies." Footsteps, cautious, slow. Men picking through rubble, looking for corpses. Looking for confirmation that the job was done and they could collect their pay and go home. Flint held up his hand. "Wait, not yet. Let them come closer. Let them find the cellar entrance." A voice from above. "Captain, there's a cellar entrance here." "Well, check it, you idiot." A shadow appeared at the entrance, silhouette against daylight. Man with a rifle peering down into darkness, eyes not yet adjusted. Flint squeezed his trigger. The Winchester barked once. The shadow fell. Immediately, another man appeared. Dakota fired. He dropped. 2 more rushed the entrance together, trying to use numbers. They jammed in the narrow space just as Dakota had predicted. Doc's shotgun roared. Both men fell, blocking the entrance with their bodies. A fourth tried to push through. Thomas, who'd said his hands shook too badly to shoot, proved that desperation steadies aim. His pistol cracked, and the man stumbled backward. "They're alive! They're in the cellar!" Panic in the voice. Fear replacing confidence. Flint pulled a dynamite stick from his belt, lit the fuse, counted 3 seconds, then threw it up through the entrance. The explosion collapsed the false door mechanism they'd installed, buried the entrance under rubble and bodies and broken timber, bought them precious time. But now smoke was seeping through the gaps. Thick, black, choking. Creed's voice muffled but clear enough. "Burn them out. I want smoke so thick they can't breathe. The smell of kerosene, the crackle of flames. Heat building." "Tunnel," Flint ordered. "Now, single file, quick and quiet." They crawled through the escape passage. 40 feet that felt like 40 miles. Thomas first, then Doc, then Dakota Flint bringing up the rear. The tunnel was narrow, barely wide enough for shoulders. Dirt walls, timber supports that creaked ominously, the kind of space that made you think about cave-ins and being buried alive. They emerged in tall grass near the creek, 50 yards from the burning house. Militia members had their backs turned, watching the fire, convinced their quarry was dying in the smoke. Flint made a hand signal. 3, 2, 1. 4 rifles opened fire from behind. Chaos erupted across the battlefield like a kicked anthill. 3 men dropped before anyone understood where the shots were coming from. Horses panicked and bolted. Men dove for cover, disoriented, confused, caught completely off guard by an enemy that should have been dead. The element of surprise was worth 10 men. For the first time since the siege began, the odds shifted slightly less impossible. And somewhere on a ridge to the northeast, smoke signals answered. Smoke signals. Help was coming. The question was whether it would arrive in time. The firefight that erupted in the grass near the creek was brutal and chaotic. Flint's carefully planned defense had dissolved into the kind of desperate, scrambling violence where survival depended more on instinct than strategy. Men shouted. Horses screamed. Bullets whined through the air like angry hornets seeking flesh. Flint moved through the tall grass like a ghost, using every depression in the ground, every rock outcropping, every bit of cover the landscape offered. His Texas Ranger training came back, like muscle memory, body remembering things mind had tried to forget. He fired, moved, fired again, never staying in one place long enough for return fire to find him. Beside him, Dakota fought with the fluid grace of someone born to guerrilla warfare. She would appear from behind a boulder, drop a man with her rifle, then vanish before his companions could react. Apache tactics. Death from nowhere, the enemy never knowing where the next shot would come from. Doc provided covering fire from a position near the creek bed, his shotgun booming at regular intervals. For a man who'd sworn he was too old for this, he fought with the steady competence of someone who'd survived Fredericksburg and Antietam. His hands didn't shake. His aim didn't waver. War might have haunted his dreams, but it had also taught him how to stay alive when the shooting started. Thomas Reed fought with the fury of a man who discovered his entire crusade had been built on lies. 3 years hunting the wrong man, while the real killer grew rich on blood money. That kind of revelation either broke a man or forged him into something harder. Thomas had chosen hard. His pistol cracked methodically, each shot deliberate, each one seeking the justice he'd been too blind to pursue earlier. The militia broke apart under the surprise attack. These weren't soldiers. They were hired guns drifters, men who'd signed up for $20 a day and the promise of easy work. Nobody had mentioned anything about fighting an entrenched enemy who kept appearing from impossible angles. Nobody had warned them they might be working for a murderer. 8 men threw down their weapons and raised their hands in surrender. 4 more spurred their horses and fled south, riding hard and not looking back. The rest, maybe 18 men, scrambled for defensive positions around the 2 Gatling gun wagons. Captain Isaiah Creed stood in the center of his remaining forces, face purple with rage. The scar that ran from his eye to his jaw had gone white, standing out against his flushed skin like a lightning bolt frozen in flesh. "Cowards!" he screamed at the men who'd surrendered. "Yellow-bellied cowards! I'll see you hanged for desertion." But his voice had lost its authority. The men who'd surrendered looked at him with something between disgust and relief, like they'd finally seen the monster hiding behind the uniform and medals and speeches about duty. The battle reached a temporary stalemate. Creed's men had superior numbers and the Gatling guns. Flint's group had better positioning and the psychological advantage of having survived what should have been certain death. Both sides knew that pressing the attack meant more casualties than anyone wanted to accept. Creed tried to rally his men for another assault, but the heart had gone out of them. They'd signed up to hunt criminals, not to help cover up a murder. Thomas's revelation had poisoned the well. Doubt had taken root and was spreading like infection through the militia's ranks. That's when the sound came from the northeast ridge. Faint at first, growing louder. A sound that made Creed's men go pale and sent a surge of hope through Flint's chest. Apache war cries, the ancient ululating call that had terrified conquistadors and cavalry for 300 years, the sound of warriors riding to battle. 18 riders crested the ridge spread in a classic Apache assault formation. They didn't charge directly. That was white man's tactics, wasteful and stupid. Instead, they split into 3 groups, each moving to flank Creed's position, cutting off escape routes, creating a killing box. Leading them was a man who looked like a younger male version of Dakota. Same high cheekbones, same fierce eyes, same bearing that suggested he'd been born knowing how to fight and had spent his entire life perfecting the knowledge. Dakota's breath caught. "Cochise, my brother came." Her voice held wonder and relief and something close to tears. The smoke signals had worked. Against all odds, against time and distance, her brother had seen her call and answered. Cochise rode at the head of his warriors, a rifle in one hand and a lance in the other, straddling the old ways and the new. He wore traditional Apache clothing mixed with pieces of cavalry uniform taken from enemies. His horse was painted with war symbols. This wasn't a raid. This was a statement. This was Apache people standing up and saying, "We're still here, we still matter, we still fight." The math shifted dramatically. 18 militia against 4 defenders was manageable. 18 militia against 4 defenders plus 18 Apache warriors was a massacre waiting to happen. Creed saw it too. His face went from red to white. He'd fought Apache before, survived an ambush at Devil's Canyon that had killed most of his unit. He knew what these warriors could do when motivated, knew they didn't take prisoners, knew that if they overran his position, the best he could hope for was a quick death. "Fall back," he ordered. "To the wagons, form defensive square." His men scrambled to comply, forming a rough circle around the 2 Gatling gun wagons. Decent tactics. The guns gave them firepower advantage if they could keep attackers at distance. The wagon bodies provided some cover. It was defensible. But defending wasn't the same as winning. They were trapped, outnumbered, and fighting people who knew this land better than they knew their own mothers' faces. The Apache warriors didn't press the attack immediately. They circled at a distance just out of effective rifle range, letting the militia stew in their fear. Psychological warfare. Let the enemy imagine what was coming. Let terror do half the work before the first shot was fired. Cochise broke away from his warriors and rode toward Dakota's position. He dismounted 30 yards out and approached on foot, hands visible, showing he came in peace to his sister at least. Up close, Flint could see the family resemblance even more strongly. Cochise was 27 younger than Dakota, but carrying himself with the authority of a war leader. His eyes swept over the battlefield, cataloging positions, counting enemies, assessing tactical advantages with the speed of someone who'd been making life or death decisions since childhood. "Your smoke signal reached me near Fort Apache," he said in English, speaking for everyone's benefit. 3 days hard ride. I gathered volunteers from 3 bands. Everyone remembers Nietzsche. Everyone knows what you're trying to do for the people." Dakota gripped her brother's forearm in the traditional greeting. They spoke rapidly in Apache for a moment, words flowing too fast for Flint to catch more than occasional familiar sounds. Then Cochise turned his attention to Flint. "This is the white man you chose." His tone was neutral, but his eyes were measuring, judging, deciding whether Flint was worthy of his sister's trust. "This is the white man who chose us," Dakota corrected. Cochise studied Flint for a long moment. Then, to Flint's surprise, he extended his hand in the white man's greeting. "Then he's Apache in spirit. We fight together." Flint took the hand. The grip was firm, calloused, the handshake of someone who knew the value of loyalty and the cost of betrayal. "I don't deserve that honor." "Honor isn't what you deserve," Cochise said. "It's what you do. You've done plenty." Doc emerged from his position, moving carefully, shotgun held, non-threateningly. He looked at the Apache warriors on the ridge, then at Cochise, then at the surrounded militia, and a grim smile crossed his weathered face. "Well," he said with dark humor, "this changes things considerably." Thomas Reed approached as well, hands visible, aware that he was an unknown element to warriors who had every reason to distrust white men. Cochise's eyes narrowed when he saw him. "This is Thomas Reed," Flint said quickly. "Catherine's brother. He brought proof that Creed murdered my family. He's with us." Cochise considered this. "The brother of a good woman is welcome. The enemy of our enemy is welcome. You fight with honor today, and you'll be remembered with honor." The standoff had shifted from immediate combat to a tense negotiation standoff. 22 Allied fighters surrounded 18 militia members who were cornered like rats. Creed had to know he'd lost. The question was whether pride would let him admit it, or whether he'd force everyone to pay in blood for his ego. Flint made a decision. He stood up from cover rifle held loosely, but ready. "I'm going to talk to him." "That's suicide," Doc protested. "Maybe, but we've got wounded on both sides. We've got men who've surrendered that need tending, and we've got a chance to end this without killing everyone." Flint looked at Cochise. "Your warrior's willing to hold position while I try." Cochise's expression was skeptical. "White men rarely listen to reason when cornered." "Then I'll have wasted 5 minutes. But if there's a chance to avoid more death, I have to try." Dakota stood beside him. "I'm coming with you." "Like hell you are. You're what he wants." "Exactly. Which means he'll listen if I'm there. Otherwise he'll just shoot you and claim self-defense." She was right, and Flint hated it. But he couldn't argue the logic. Together they walked across the open ground toward the militia's defensive position. Every step felt like walking through mud, his body screaming that this was insane, that he was exposing himself to 30 rifles and 2 Gatling guns, that one nervous trigger finger could end everything. They stopped 30 feet from the wagons, close enough to be heard, far enough that a sudden rush would be suicide. "Creed," Flint called out, "you've lost. Your men are surrendering. The ones with sense already ran. You're surrounded and outnumbered. Let's end this before more people die." For a long moment, nothing. Then Captain Isaiah Creed stood up behind one of the wagons. At 53, he still had the bearing of a cavalry officer, still wore his uniform jacket despite the heat, still carried himself like a man who expected obedience and got angry when the world refused to comply. "End it." His voice dripped contempt. "You embarrassed me, Harrigan, made me look weak, made me look like a liar in front of my own men. You think I'm just going to walk away from that? I think you're going to hang for murder if you don't." Thomas has proof, Pike's testimony, your letter, the land transfer documents. It's over, Creed. You can surrender and face trial, or you can die here. Those are your choices. Creed's laugh was bitter. "Trial in whose court? With whose judge? I own half the territorial government. I've got 3 judges in my pocket and 2 sheriffs who owe me favors. You think justice actually exists out here? You think the law applies to men like me? Then we'll make it apply," Dakota said. Her voice was calm but carried complete conviction. "We'll tell your story, every newspaper from here to San Francisco, every preacher, every politician. We'll make you famous, Captain Creed. Make sure everyone knows your name and what you did." Something flickered in Creed's eyes. Not fear exactly, but uncertainty. Men like him craved respect, legacy, being remembered as heroes. The threat of being remembered as a murderer of women and children was worse than the threat of death. "You've got 1 minute to decide," Flint said. "Surrender or fight. But know this. If you fight, we won't stop until you're dead. And your men, the ones who are just here for the money, they'll die too. All because you couldn't admit when you were beaten." Creed looked around at his remaining militia, saw the doubt in their faces, saw the way some of them were calculating odds, wondering if $20 a day was worth dying for a man who'd murdered a woman and child for a silver mine. 30 seconds, Flint said. Creed's hand moved toward his revolver. For a moment, Flint thought he'd actually do it, actually try to shoot his way out. But then one of the militia members spoke up. "Captain, I got a wife and kids in Tucson. This ain't worth dying for." Another man nodded. "He's right. We signed up to chase outlaws, not to help cover up murder." "Cowards," Creed hissed. "All of you, yellow cowards." But his hand moved away from his gun. Defeat settled over him like a shroud. "I want safe passage," he said. "I surrender, but I want guarantee of safe passage to town. A fair trial. No Apache justice." Cochise had moved close enough to hear. "Apache justice would be quicker than you deserve. But my sister speaks for me today. If she says trial, then trial." Dakota nodded slowly. "You'll face white man's law, but we'll be there, every day, making sure the truth gets told." Creed's shoulders slumped. He was beaten, and he knew it. Beaten not by superior firepower, but by exposure, by truth, by the collapse of the carefully constructed lies he'd told himself about being a good man, doing hard but necessary things. "All right," he said quietly. "We surrender, all of us." One by one, the militia members threw down their weapons. 18 rifles clattered to the ground. The 2 Gatling guns sat silent, their crews stepping away with hands raised. The battle was over, not with a bang, but with the quiet acknowledgement that sometimes, even in the lawless territories, truth mattered. Doc moved in with his medical bag, tending to the wounded on both sides. 2 Apache warriors had been hit, neither critically. 3 militia members were badly hurt, including one who'd taken shrapnel from Flint's dynamite. Doc worked with steady hands, speaking quietly to patients in English and broken Spanish, and even a few words of Apache he'd picked up over the years. Flint stood in the center of the battlefield, surveying the wreckage of his ranch. The house was gone, burned to the foundation. The barn had taken damage from stray bullets. One of the corrals had collapsed. 3 years of work destroyed in one morning. But he was alive. Dakota was alive. They'd survived. And the man who'd murdered Catherine and Emma was in custody, facing justice. It should have felt like victory, should have felt like vindication. Instead, Flint just felt tired, bone-deep tired. The kind of exhaustion that came not from physical exertion, but from emotional weight lifted after being carried too long. Dakota found him standing amid the ruins of his kitchen, looking at the place where the table had been, where he'd shared that last meal with Doc and Dakota before everything changed. "We'll rebuild," she said simply. "Will we?" "Yes, stronger than before. Apache and white together. A house that honors both traditions." Flint looked at her. Really looked. Saw not just a woman trying to save her people, not just a tactical ally, but someone who'd stood beside him when the world caught fire. Someone who'd fought and bled and refused to break. "The child you asked for," he said quietly. "I meant what I said. When this is over, when Creed's locked away, we'll do it right, not as an agreement, as a choice." Dakota's hand found his. Her palm was warm, solid, real. "As partners." "As partners," he agreed. Cochise approached his warriors, beginning the process of securing prisoners for the ride to town. "Red Rock will have stories to tell tonight, about the day Apache and white men fought together against corruption, about the day my sister and a horse trader changed what's possible." "Don't make it more than it was," Flint said. "We just survived." Surviving against those odds, Cochise smiled slightly. That's always more than it seems. That's how legends start. As the sun climbed toward noon, casting harsh shadows across the battlefield, a small group prepared to ride to Red Rock. Flint, Dakota, Doc Thomas, Cochise, and 6 Apache warriors escorting a chained Isaiah Creed and his remaining militia members. The rest of Cochise's warriors would stay to guard the ranch to help with the wounded, to bear witness to what had happened here. But before they could mount up, Doc gasped and staggered. His hand went to his side. When he pulled it away, it was red with blood. "Doc!" Flint was beside him in an instant, catching him as he fell. The old surgeon's face had gone gray. He looked down at the spreading stain on his shirt with the detached professional interest of someone who'd seen too many wounds to be surprised by one more. "Gutshot," he said matter-of-factly. "Must have caught a ricochet during the fighting. Didn't even feel it. Adrenaline's a hell of a drug." Dakota was already moving, grabbing Doc's medical bag, pulling out supplies. But Doc caught her hand. "Don't waste supplies, girl. We both know what a gut shot means, especially one that's been bleeding internal for 3 hours." He smiled weakly. "Well, I'm a doctor. Trust me on this." "No." Flint's voice was raw. "No, you stubborn old bastard. You don't get to die, not after everything. Everyone dies, Flint. I just get to do it for something that mattered." Doc coughed and blood flecked his lips. "Not a bad way to go. Better than old age and forgetting my own name." They carried him to a piece of shade near what was left of the barn, made him as comfortable as possible on a blanket. Dakota tried every Apache healing technique she knew, but some wounds were beyond herbal medicine and prayer. Doc's breathing grew shallower. His skin grew colder despite the heat. But his eyes remained clear, focused, present until the end. "Tell my story," he said to Flint, gripping his hand with surprising strength. "Old Union surgeon who finally found something worth fighting for, who died standing up instead of sitting down." "I'll tell it," Flint promised, his voice breaking. Doc's eyes moved to Dakota. "Take care of him. He's more fragile than he looks." "I will." To Thomas, "You found your way back to the truth. That's rare. Don't waste it." "I won't." To Cochise, "Your sister's a warrior. Honor her by letting her choose her own path." Cochise nodded understanding, passing between them. Doc's grip on Flint's hand weakened. His breathing slowed. And as the sun climbed toward its zenith, Dr. Samuel Whitmore closed his eyes for the last time, a small smile on his weathered face. The man who'd survived Fredericksburg and Antietam, who'd sewn men back together and watched them die anyway, who'd come west to escape ghosts and found purpose instead, was finally at rest. They buried him that evening on the ridge overlooking the ranch as the sun set in colors that would have made a painter weep. Apache ceremony and Christian prayer mixed together, honoring a man who'd bridged worlds without even trying. Flint stood over the grave long after the others had walked away, speaking to a friend who could no longer hear, but somehow he hoped might understand. "You were right, Doc. About living instead of dying. About standing up. About all of it." The wind carried his words across the Arizona Territory, past Red Rock, where Marshal Kane was preparing jail cells, past the ruined ranch, where work would begin tomorrow, past the ridge where Apache warriors kept watch out into the vast desert where anything seemed possible if you were brave enough to try. The siege was over, but the story was just beginning. The morning after Doc's burial dawned gray and mournful, as if the sky itself had decided to honor a good man's passing. Flint woke in a borrowed tent that Cochise's warriors had erected near the ruins of his ranch, his body aching from wounds he hadn't noticed during the fighting, a graze across his ribs, bruised knuckles, a cut on his forehead that had dried into a crusty line, the inventory of survival. Dakota was already awake, sitting outside the tent with her shoulder wrapped in clean bandages. The bullet that had torn through her during the siege had missed bone and major vessels, but the wound would take weeks to heal properly. She moved carefully, protecting the injury, but her eyes were alert and focused on the eastern horizon where the sun was beginning its climb. "How's the pain?" Flint asked, emerging from the tent. "Manageable. Apache learn early to live with discomfort." She glanced at him. "How's yours?" "The same." They sat together in companionable silence, watching the light change from gray to gold. Around them, the camp was stirring. Apache warriors preparing for the day's work. Thomas Reed checking on the prisoners who were chained to wagon wheels under guard. The survivors of yesterday's battle moving through the rituals of mourning with the slightly dazed expressions of people who'd expected to die and were still adjusting to being alive. Cochise approached with coffee strong and bitter. Marshal Kane sent word from town. He wants Creed brought in today. Public hearing. Let everyone see justice being done. Good, Flint said. Sunlight's the best disinfectant. Let people see exactly what kind of man they've been taking orders from. There's more. Cochise's expression was troubled. Last night, while the camp slept, one of the prisoners died. Vincent Creed. Flint's hand tightened on his coffee cup. How? Arrow through the throat. Quick. Professional. Found at dawn when the guard changed. Someone moved through 60 men without making a sound. Someone wanted him dead before he could talk. The implications hung heavy in the morning air. Vincent had been the weak link, the drunk brother who might have testified against Isaiah to save his own skin. Now that possibility was erased, and someone in their camp was a killer. Who had access? Dakota asked quietly. Everyone, Cochise admitted. We're not a jail. We're warriors watching prisoners in an open camp. Anyone could have moved during the night. Flint stood, his mind working through possibilities. Could have been one of Creed's own men, silencing Vincent before he could implicate them. Could have been someone from town with a grudge. Could have been anyone with a reason to keep secrets buried. Or it could have been revenge, Dakota said. Pure and simple. Vincent started this by attacking me in the market. Maybe someone decided he should pay for that. They would never know for certain. In a frontier camp with 60 people and darkness to hide in, the killer could be anyone. The Apache warriors denied responsibility, but their eyes held a satisfaction that suggested they wouldn't have stopped whoever did it. Justice came in many forms, and not all of them involved courts and judges. By mid-morning, they were ready to ride. Isaiah Creed sat on a horse with his hands bound, flanked by 6 Apache warriors, and Thomas Reed, who'd appointed himself as personal guard. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The man who'd spent 3 years hunting Flint was now the one ensuring Creed faced justice for the crime Flint had been accused of committing. The ride to Red Rock took 4 hours. Word had spread, and people lined the streets to watch the procession. Merchants, ranchers, women with children, even the prostitutes from the Silver Dollar Saloon had come out to see the spectacle. Captain Isaiah Creed, war hero and respected citizen, being brought in as a murderer. Some faces showed shock. Others showed grim satisfaction, like they'd suspected all along but hadn't dared speak up. Fear of Creed's power, his money, his willingness to destroy anyone who challenged him had kept tongues silent. But now, seeing him bound and defeated, people found their courage returning. Marshal Lucas Kane met them at the jailhouse, his weathered face solemn. At 52, he'd seen enough frontier justice to know that what happened in the next few days would define Red Rock for years to come. Get it right, and they'd have a town built on law. Get it wrong, and they'd descend into the kind of vigilante chaos that destroyed communities from the inside out. Got cells ready, Kane said, and Judge Morrison's riding in from Tucson, should be here by tomorrow evening. He'll conduct a proper hearing, evidence presented, witnesses called. Do this by the book. Good, Flint said. That's how Doc would have wanted it. Legal, official, no shortcuts. They locked Creed in the strongest cell iron bars and a guard rotation that would ensure no one got to him before trial. The other militia members were split up, some released on their own recognizance after swearing they'd been duped, others held as potential accomplices or witnesses. Through it all, Creed said nothing, just sat on his cell bunk, staring at the wall with the blank expression of a man whose entire world had collapsed and who hadn't yet processed the magnitude of his fall. Red Sky Walker appeared as they were securing the prisoners, carrying news from the surrounding area. "Pike's dead," he announced without preamble. "Found in Colorado Springs 3 days ago, knifed to the gut in an alley behind a saloon." Thomas went pale. "That's convenient. Real convenient." "Too convenient," Flint agreed. The two witnesses who could directly implicate Creed were now dead. Vincent and Pike. Someone was cleaning up loose ends with ruthless efficiency. "Could be coincidence," Kane said, but his tone suggested he didn't believe it. "Pike was a drunk in a rough town. Could have been a robbery gone wrong. Or it could be Creed has friends we don't know about," Dakota said. "Men willing to kill to protect their investment in his schemes." The implications were chilling. How deep did Creed's corruption go? How many people in the territorial government, in the courts, in law enforcement were compromised? The letter Thomas had recovered might not be enough without living testimony to back it up. But they had something else, something Creed hadn't counted on. They had the land transfer records. They had the auction documents showing the proxy purchase. They had 3 years of silver extraction from Catherine's property, all traced back through shell companies to Isaiah Creed's accounts. Paper trail that no amount of murder could erase. Thomas and Flint spent the afternoon with Kane laying out the evidence, building the case. It was tedious work connecting dots and establishing timelines, but it was necessary. Doc hadn't died so they could settle for rough justice. He'd died believing the law could work if good people forced it to. As sunset approached, Flint found himself walking to the town cemetery on the edge of Red Rock. 2 fresh graves marked with simple wooden crosses, one for Dr. Samuel Whitmore, one for a militia member who'd died during the siege, a kid barely 20 who'd made the mistake of thinking violence was adventure. Dakota joined him, moving carefully with her injured shoulder. They stood in silence, watching light fade from the desert sky. "I've been thinking about what Doc said," Dakota spoke finally. "About me choosing my own path. And the child we talked about. I still want that, need that for my people, but I've been thinking it doesn't have to be just transaction, doesn't have to be cold and calculated." Flint looked at her. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying maybe we could try, really try, not as strangers fulfilling an agreement, but as people who stood together when the world caught fire and somehow survived." She paused. "I don't love you, not yet, but I respect you, trust you. And I think given time, maybe love could grow from that foundation." Her honesty was like a blade, sharp and clean. No false promises, no romantic delusions, just practical assessment of possibilities. It should have felt cold. Instead, it felt like the most honest thing anyone had said to Flint in 3 years. "I don't love you either," he said carefully. "Don't even know if I remember how to love anyone after Catherine. But I see you, Dakota, really see you. And that's more than I've felt for anyone since the fire." She took his hand, not romantically, more like soldiers acknowledging shared combat. "Then we start there. We build slowly, see what grows. And if nothing grows, if we're just 2 broken people trying to fix each other, then at least we tried. At least we gave your daughter and my people a chance at a future." She squeezed his hand. "But I think something will grow. I think we've already planted seeds without realizing it." They stood together as full darkness fell, and for the first time in 3 years, Flint allowed himself to imagine a future that didn't involve whiskey and regret. A future with purpose, with partnership, maybe even eventually with something resembling peace. The hearing began 2 days later in the Red Rock Courthouse, a modest building with peeling paint and windows that didn't quite close right, but it was the seat of law in this part of the territory, and that gave it weight beyond its physical appearance. Judge Morrison presided, a stern man in his 60s with a reputation for fairness that had survived 3 decades on the frontier. He listened to opening statements with an impassive face that gave no hint of his thoughts. The prosecution, such as it was, consisted of Thomas Reed presenting evidence, Pike's letter in Creed's handwriting, land transfer documents, testimony from the fire marshal who'd investigated Catherine's death, financial records showing Creed's proxy purchase and subsequent profits. It was circumstantial, but it was overwhelming in its cumulative weight. Creed's defense attorney, a slick lawyer from Tucson named Hammond, tried to poke holes in the timeline to suggest alternative explanations to paint his client as a successful businessman being persecuted by bitter rivals. But the evidence kept mounting. Document after document. Witness after witness. Red Skywalker testified about Catherine's character, about her refusal to sell, about the pressure Creed had applied. Marshal Kane testified about suspicious deaths of potential witnesses. Even some of Creed's own militia members, granted immunity in exchange for testimony, spoke about conversations they'd overheard, implications of things better left unsaid. And through it all, Creed sat silent. His lawyer advised him not to take the stand, knowing that any statement would open him to cross-examination that would shred whatever remained of his reputation. The hearing lasted 3 days. On the third evening, Judge Morrison called for closing statements. Thomas Reed stood, his voice steady, despite the emotion churning beneath. 3 years ago, my sister Catherine and my niece Emma died in what we were told was an accident. For 3 years I blamed James Harrigan, hunted him, hated him, made him run because I needed someone to blame for my grief. He paused, looking directly at Creed. But the truth is, they died because Isaiah Creed valued silver more than human life, because he saw an obstacle and decided murder was easier than negotiation. Catherine refused to sell, so he burned her alive. A 5-year-old child died screaming because a man wanted 40 acres of rock. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Even the lawyer Hammond had stopped shuffling papers. Thomas continued, "If we let this stand, if we say that men with money and power can kill without consequence, then we're not a society. We're just animals pretending at civilization. Doc Whitmore died believing justice could work. My sister died refusing to surrender. Let's honor them by proving that even here, even in the territories, the law means something." He sat down. Judge Morrison made notes. Then he looked at Creed's lawyer. "Does the defense wish to make a closing statement?" Hammond stood, smoothed his suit, and spoke for 10 minutes about reasonable doubt and insufficient evidence and the tragedy of rushing to judgment. It was professional, competent, and completely unconvincing. Everyone in that courtroom knew what Creed had done. The only question was whether the law had the strength to acknowledge it. Judge Morrison adjourned for the evening. "I'll deliver my ruling tomorrow at noon. Until then, the prisoner remains in custody." That night, Flint couldn't sleep. He walked the streets of Red Rock, past the Silver Dollar Saloon, where he'd been drinking the night Catherine died, past Henderson's General Store, where he'd first seen Dakota, past the jail where Creed sat waiting to learn his fate. Dakota found him near midnight, sitting on a bench outside the courthouse. She lowered herself carefully beside him, her shoulder still healing. "Can't sleep either," she asked, "thinking about what happens if Morrison lets him go, if money and connections win after all. Then we deal with it. Apache have been dealing with unjust systems for 300 years. We adapt. We survive. That's not justice." "No," she agreed. "But it's reality. Sometimes the world is unjust. The question is whether you let that break you or whether you keep fighting anyway." Flint looked at her in the moonlight. Strong, pragmatic, refusing to surrender to despair even when despair seemed reasonable. How do you do that? How do you keep hope alive when everything's working against you? Because the alternative is giving up. And giving up means Creed wins, means everyone like him wins, means Catherine and Emma and Doc and all the others died for nothing. She took his hand. "So we don't give up. We keep pushing, keep believing, keep building something better, even if we never live to see it finished." They sat together until dawn began to lighten the eastern sky. Then they walked back to the boarding house, where they'd been staying, got a few hours of fitful sleep, and rose to face whatever verdict the day would bring. Noon came too slowly and too quickly. The courthouse was packed standing room only, with overflow crowd outside the windows trying to hear through the gaps in the walls. Every seat filled, every eye focused forward. Judge Morrison entered precisely at noon, took his seat, arranged his papers with methodical care. The silence was so complete that the scratch of his pen seemed loud as thunder. Finally he looked up. This court has heard 3 days of testimony regarding the death of Catherine Harrigan and her daughter Emma. The evidence presented has been extensive. The circumstances surrounding their deaths, when examined in totality, paint a clear picture. He paused, letting the tension build. Flint felt Dakota's hand grip his under the table. Isaiah Creed, this court finds that there is sufficient evidence to bind you over for trial on 2 counts of murder in the first degree, 3 counts of conspiracy to commit murder, 5 counts of fraud, and 8 counts of corruption of public officials. Bail is denied. You will be held in territorial custody pending trial in Tucson, where a jury of your peers will determine your guilt or innocence. The courtroom exploded into noise, gasps, cheers, outrage from Creed's remaining supporters. The judge's gavel banged repeatedly, calling for order. Furthermore, Morrison continued when silence finally returned, I am ordering a territorial investigation into all land transactions in this district for the past 5 years. If Captain Creed's actions represent a pattern of behavior, others may have been victimized. Justice delayed is justice denied, but justice begun is hope renewed. Creed's face had gone gray. Being bound over for trial wasn't a conviction, but in a case this public with evidence this strong, it was close enough. His lawyer immediately began talking about appeals, but Hammond's heart wasn't in it. He knew a losing case when he saw one. Marshal Kane and 2 deputies escorted Creed from the courtroom. As he passed Flint and Thomas, Creed finally spoke, his voice hoarse. This isn't over. I have friends, resources. You think one judge changes anything? No, Flint said quietly, but it's a start. And sometimes a start is all you need. They took Creed to the jail for his last night in Red Rock. Tomorrow he'd be transferred to Tucson to await trial. Tonight he would sit in an iron cage and contemplate the ruin of everything he'd built through violence and corruption. The town celebrated that evening. Not wild celebration, but the quiet satisfaction of people who'd seen the law actually work for once. The Silver Dollar served free drinks to anyone who'd testified. Henderson's general store stayed open late, doing brisk business as people bought supplies they'd been putting off, as if the resolution of Creed's case had freed them to think about the future again. Flint didn't join the celebration. Instead, he rode back to his ranch with Dakota and Cochise. The Apache warriors had begun clearing rubble, salvaging what could be saved, preparing ground for rebuilding. Standing in the ruins of his kitchen, looking at the foundation that somehow remained intact despite the fire and bullets, Flint made a decision. We rebuild, he said, bigger than before, strong enough to last, a house that honors both traditions like you said. Dakota smiled. When do we start? Tomorrow. After Creed's gone and this chapter is really closed, we start building the next one. Cochise clasped Flint's shoulder. My warriors will help. We build it together, white and Apache, a symbol of what's possible when people choose to stand together instead of apart. As the sun set on that day, painting the sky in colors Doc would have appreciated, Flint allowed himself to feel something he hadn't felt in 3 years. Not happiness exactly, not yet, but hope. Fragile as newborn skin, but real. The battle was won. The war for justice would continue in Tucson's courts. But here in this place where everything had burned and somehow new growth was already beginning, 3 people stood together and imagined a future built on foundations stronger than hate. Doc would have approved. Catherine and Emma would have approved. and maybe, just maybe, that was enough. 6 months passed like water flowing over stone, slowly reshaping the landscape of lives that had been torn apart and were now being carefully pieced back together. Winter came to Arizona, bringing cold nights and brief rains that turned the desert temporarily green, the kind of season that reminded people that even in harsh lands, renewal was possible. The new Harrigan Ranch rose from the ashes of the old, but it was different now. The foundation was stone Apache style, 3 feet thick and built to last generations. The upper structure was timber frame settler construction with wide windows that caught the morning light. 2 cultures merged into something that belonged completely to neither and entirely to both. Cochise's warriors had stayed through the building process, working alongside hired laborers from Red Rock. The cooperation wasn't always smooth. Old prejudices died hard. But the sight of Apache and white men sharing meals, trading construction techniques, slowly learning to see each other as individuals rather than threats, that was its own kind of victory. Small, gradual, real. Flint worked from sunup to sundown, his hands calloused and bleeding. By the end of each day, his body aching in ways that felt good, productive. The opposite of the slow self-destruction he'd embraced for 3 years after Catherine's death. Physical labor was its own kind of therapy, exhausting the body so completely that the mind had no energy left for dwelling on ghosts. Dakota worked beside him. Her shoulder healed now, but still stiff in cold weather. She'd become the bridge between the Apache workers and the white laborers, translating not just language but intention, smoothing over misunderstandings before they could become conflicts. She moved through the construction site with quiet authority, earning respect through competence rather than demanding it through position. News from Tucson arrived periodically. Creed's trial had been delayed twice due to legal maneuvering by his expensive attorneys. But the territorial investigation Judge Morrison had ordered was bearing fruit. 3 other landowners came forward with stories of intimidation, mysterious fires, and forced sales at below-market prices. The pattern was undeniable. Creed had been running a systematic land grab operation for years, and Catherine Harrigan had simply been the one who refused to bend. Thomas Reed had become the de facto leader of the Victims' Coalition, organizing testimony, coordinating with prosecutors, ensuring that the full scope of Creed's crimes would be laid bare in court. It gave him purpose, redemption through action. The brother who'd failed Catherine in life was determined not to fail her in death. Marshal Kane visited the ranch one cold January morning, riding up with his collar turned against the wind. He dismounted stiffly, age and old injuries making the movement awkward, and accepted the coffee Dakota offered with grateful nods. "Trial set for March," he announced, warming his hands on the cup. "No more delays. Judge made it clear he's done with legal games. Creed will face justice, or the territorial government will explain why to some very angry voters." "About time," Flint said. They were sitting in what would eventually be the main room, currently just framed walls and a temporary roof, but it was shelter, and that was enough. Kane's expression grew more serious. "There's something else. The governor wants to meet you, both of you." He looked at Flint and Dakota. "Wants to discuss establishing a permanent marshal position here. Someone to maintain order, bridge the gap between settlers, and Apache make sure what happened with Creed doesn't happen again." Flint set down his coffee. "You're offering me a badge." "Not offering. The governor is. He's impressed by what happened here. How you brought Creed down without starting a race war. How you got Apache and whites working together instead of killing each other. Territory needs more of that, needs people who can see past old hatreds to what's possible." "I'm a horse trader, not a lawman." "You were a Texas Ranger for 8 years, Kane countered. "Don't pretend you don't know the work. And you've already been doing it. Keeping peace, settling disputes. People around here respect you. That's half the job right there." Dakota was watching Flint carefully, her expression neutral, letting him make his own decision without pressure. But he could sense her thoughts. This was a chance to build something lasting, to ensure that Doc's sacrifice meant more than just one criminal facing justice. "I'd want jurisdiction over Apache territories too," Flint said slowly. "Not just settler lands. Any man threatening peaceful Indians answers to me, white or otherwise. That's non-negotiable." Kane smiled slightly. "Governor expected you'd say that. He's authorized it. 50-mile radius. Full martial authority. $200 a month, plus expenses. You'd be the law around here, Flint. Question is whether you want the responsibility." Flint looked around the half-built house, thought about Catherine and Emma, about Doc and the militia kid who died too young, about all the violence and waste and unnecessary suffering that came from people refusing to see each other's humanity. "I'll think about it," he said. Kane nodded. "Fair enough. Let me know by the end of the month. Governor wants an answer before the trial." After Kane left, Flint and Dakota sat in silence. The wind rattled the temporary roof. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk called. The world continued its ancient rhythms, indifferent to human drama. "What do you think?" Flint asked finally. "I think you already know your answer. You're just afraid of it." "Afraid of what?" "Afraid of having purpose again. Afraid that if you care about something, it can be taken away, like Catherine was taken away." Dakota's gaze was direct, unflinching. "But living in fear of loss isn't living. It's just waiting to die." She was right, and he hated it. Hated how clearly she saw through his defenses. But that clarity was also why he trusted her. Dakota didn't offer comfortable lies. She offered uncomfortable truths, and truth was what he needed, even when it hurt. "If I take the badge, things change," he said. "I become a target. Anyone with a grudge, any outlaw passing through, anyone who disagrees with a ruling, they'll come for me, and they'll come for anyone close to me." "So you're saying I'd be in danger?" It wasn't a question. "Yes. I've been in danger my entire life. Cavalry, land thieves, diseases the white man brought that killed half my people. Danger is constant. The question is whether you face it alone or with someone beside you." Flint reached out and took her hand. They'd been sleeping in the same tent for 2 months now, their relationship evolving slowly from alliance to something warmer. Still not love, but companionship, partnership, the foundation from which love might eventually grow. "If we do this," he said carefully, "if I take the badge and we build a life here, we do it, knowing it could all fall apart, knowing that frontier justice is fragile and men like Creed are everywhere. Then we build it strong enough to survive falling apart." She squeezed his hand. "We build it like this house. Stone foundation, deep roots, something that lasts." 3 weeks later, on a cold February morning, Flint rode into Red Rock and accepted the marshal's badge from Governor's representative. The ceremony was simple. A short speech about duty and honor, the pinning of silver to his chest. A handshake that felt like a contract signed in something more binding than ink. The townspeople who'd gathered applauded politely. Some faces showed approval. Others showed skepticism. A marshal who sided with Indians as much as settlers was a new concept, and new concepts made people nervous. But nervousness was better than the blind obedience Creed had commanded through fear. That evening, back at the ranch, Dakota performed an Apache blessing ceremony. She burned sage and spoke in her ancestral language, calling upon spirits to protect a man who'd chosen to stand between chaos and order. Flint didn't fully understand the words, but he felt their weight, felt the importance of ritual, of marking transitions, of acknowledging that his life had changed direction. "The badge is just metal," Dakota said when the ceremony concluded. "What matters is what you do with the authority it represents. Use it for justice, and you honor Doc's memory. Use it for power, and you become what we fought against." "No pressure then," Flint said with dry humor. "Pressure makes diamonds or dust. We'll see which you become." The weeks that followed tested him immediately. A dispute between a rancher and Apache hunters over grazing rights. A drunk miner who'd assaulted a Navajo woman. A land claim conflict that threatened to turn violent. Small things individually. Collectively, they were the fabric of frontier life, and how Flint handled them would establish precedent for years to come. He approached each situation with the same principle. Listen to both sides, find the truth. Apply the law equally, regardless of skin color. It sounds simple. In practice, it meant making enemies on both sides. Settlers accused him of being an Indian lover. Some Apache questioned whether any white lawman could truly be impartial. But slowly, grudgingly, people began to trust that Flint's justice was consistent, even if they didn't always agree with it. March arrived with the trial date looming. Flint and Dakota prepared to ride to Tucson for the proceedings. They would testify along with Thomas and several others. The prosecution had built a case they believed was airtight. But frontier trials were unpredictable. Creed still had money and connections. Juries could be intimidated or bribed. Justice was never guaranteed. The night before they left, a rider arrived at the ranch. A young Apache warrior, barely 17, riding bareback in the traditional way. He carried a bundle wrapped in deerskin tied with ceremonial cords. "Marshal Harrigan," the young man said formally in careful English. "Dakota sends this." Dakota stepped forward, her eyes widening with recognition and something deeper. Hope, fear, joy, all mixed together in an expression Flint had never seen on her face before. The warrior handed her the bundle. She unwrapped it with trembling hands. Inside was a photograph, expensive, rare, the kind of thing that required traveling to a city with the right equipment. The image showed Dakota holding an infant, swaddled in a blanket that mixed Apache patterns with settler fabric. The baby's eyes were open, dark, and alert, staring at the camera with the solemn intensity of someone already wise beyond their brief existence. "A girl," the warrior said, "born under the full moon 3 weeks ago, strong lungs, no fear. Dakota says to tell you she named her Catherine Walking Bear, White Way and Apache Way together. She'll bring her when the child is old enough to travel." Flint's hand shook as he reached for the photograph. His daughter. He had a daughter. Not to replace Emma, nothing could ever do that, but to honor her, to say that life continues even after loss. That hope survives even when everything burns. He saw Catherine's chin and the baby's face, Dakota's fierce eyes, his own stubborn jaw, but mostly he saw something entirely new. A person who would grow up bridging worlds, carrying both heritages, proving that different didn't have to mean divided. "When was she conceived?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "The night after Doc died," the warrior said. "Dakota says you were ready then. Your heart had opened enough to let someone new in." Flint remembered that night, the grief, the exhaustion, the desperate need to affirm life in the face of death. He and Dakota had come together not from passion, but from something deeper: mutual respect, shared survival, the beginning of real intimacy that grew from trust rather than desire. "Thank you," he managed to say. "Tell Dakota I'll prepare a place for them. When she's ready, when the baby's strong enough, they're welcome here." The warrior nodded and rode back into the darkness, leaving Flint and Dakota staring at a photograph that represented everything they'd been fighting for: future, hope, the possibility that different peoples could not just coexist but create something beautiful together. "Catherine Walking Bear," Dakota said softly, "your daughter and my sister's legacy, a child who belongs to both worlds and will help bridge them." Flint couldn't speak, could only stare at the image of a baby who would never know her namesake but would carry her forward nonetheless. 3 years ago, he'd lost everything in fire and smoke. Now, impossibly, he had a reason to believe in tomorrow. That night, he wrote a letter to the daughter he'd never met, knowing she wouldn't read it for years, maybe decades, but needing to mark this moment to put into words what he felt. "Dear Catherine, by the time you read this, you'll be old enough to ask questions about where you came from, about your mother, Dakota, and why she made the choices she made, about your father, and why I wasn't there when you were born. So let me tell you a story about the people who came before you. About a woman named Catherine Harrigan who refused to surrender even when surrender would have been easier. About a little girl named Emma who loved horses and laughter. About a doctor named Samuel Whitmore who believed justice mattered. About an Apache warrior named Nietzsche who fought for his people until the end. About Thomas Reed who learned that being wrong isn't permanent if you're willing to admit it. These are your ancestors, not all by blood but all by spirit. They fought so you could exist, so you could grow up in a world slightly less broken than the one they inherited. When you face hard choices, and you will remember them, remember that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what's right despite the fear. Your father, James Harrigan. He folded the letter carefully, sealed it with wax, and placed it in a strongbox, where it would wait for a daughter who existed in a photograph and a promise. The trial in Tucson lasted 2 weeks. The courtroom was packed every day, standing room only, with newspaper reporters from as far as San Francisco documenting every moment. The territory was watching to see if the law could actually hold powerful men accountable or if frontier justice remained exclusively for the poor and powerless. The prosecution laid out their case with methodical precision. Documents, testimony, financial records, the paper trail of corruption and murder that Creed had left behind, confident that money and fear would keep him safe forever. Creed's attorneys fought hard, poking holes where they could, trying to create reasonable doubt. But the weight of evidence was crushing. Witness after witness confirmed the pattern: land grab, intimidation, arson, murder. Thomas Reed's testimony was particularly powerful. He spoke about his sister with such love and pain that several jurors were seen wiping their eyes. Spoke about the 3 years he'd wasted hunting the wrong man while the real killer grew rich. His voice never wavered. His anger was cold and controlled. The anger of someone who'd learned that revenge was empty, but justice could heal. When Flint took the stand, he kept his testimony simple. Facts, timeline, evidence, no emotional appeals, just the truth laid bare for 12 citizens to judge. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. In frontier trials, that was an eternity. Quick verdicts usually meant acquittal or lynching. Long deliberations meant the jury was actually considering the evidence, weighing arguments, trying to get it right. When they returned, the foreman stood with a paper that shook slightly in his hands. On the charge of murder in the first degree of Catherine Harrigan, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of murder in the first degree of Emma Harrigan, we find the defendant guilty. The courtroom erupted. Creed's face went gray. His attorneys immediately began talking about appeals, but the sound was drowned out by the noise of history being made. A powerful man, a war hero with connections and money, had been held accountable for murdering a woman and child. In the Arizona Territory in 1887, that was revolutionary. The judge sentenced Creed to hang. 2 counts of murder. Execution scheduled for April 15th. No stays, no delays. Justice delayed no longer. Flint didn't attend the execution. Neither did Dakota. Some endings didn't need witnesses beyond those required by law, but Thomas Reed went. He owed Catherine that much. 3 days after the hanging, Thomas returned to Red Rock and found Flint on the porch of the half-built house. He dismounted slowly, moving like a man who'd carried a weight for years, and just set it down. "It's done," Thomas said simply, accepting the coffee Dakota offered. Neither man drank. Did he? Flint couldn't finish the question. No apology. No remorse. He stood on that platform like he still believed he'd done nothing wrong, like Catherine and Emma were just obstacles that needed removing. Thomas's voice was flat, empty. The territorial governor attended, 3 newspaper reporters. They made sure everyone knew that justice reached even powerful men. Did it feel like justice? Flint asked. Thomas considered for a long moment. It felt like an ending. Not the same thing, but maybe all we get. He set down the untouched coffee. "Catherine and Emma can rest now. That's what matters." Flint nodded. It wasn't closure. Closure was a word people used when they didn't understand that some wounds never fully heal. But it was an ending, and endings, however imperfect, mattered. As they led Creed from the courtroom in chains, he passed close enough to Flint to speak. "This isn't the end. My associates will continue the work. The territory needs strong men willing to do what's necessary. You've won today, but you've also made enemies you can't even imagine." "Then I'll deal with them the same way I dealt with you," Flint said quietly. "With truth and the law." Creed laughed bitterly. "The law is just words. Power is what matters. You'll learn that lesson before the end." But as Flint watched the man who'd murdered his family being dragged away to face the rope, he didn't feel the satisfaction he'd expected. Just a tired sadness. So much death, so much waste, all because one man valued money over human life. The ride back to Red Rock took 3 days. Flint and Dakota traveled in silence, mostly processing what had happened. Justice had been served, but it didn't bring Catherine and Emma back, didn't restore Doc to life, didn't erase 3 years of pain. "You're thinking it should feel different," Dakota said on the second day. "Yes." "Justice isn't closure, it's just truth acknowledged. The healing comes after. Slowly, in the life you build with what remains." They arrived home on a warm spring evening to find the ranch house completed. Cochise and his warriors had finished the work in their absence, adding final touches that honored both cultures. A porch facing east for morning prayers, windows that caught afternoon light, rooms large enough for a family that didn't exist yet, but might someday. Red Sky Walker was waiting on the porch with supplies and news. "Town's talking about the trial, about justice being possible even for powerful men. You've changed something here, Flint, changed what people believe is possible." "One trial doesn't change a territory." "No," the old man agreed, "but it's a start, and starts matter more than endings. Endings are inevitable. Starts take courage." That night in the new house that smelled of fresh timber and adobe stone, Flint hung the photograph of Catherine walking bare above the fireplace. His daughter, growing up somewhere in Apache territory, learning the ways of her mother's people, preparing for a life that would bridge 2 worlds. 2 weeks later, on a warm May morning, when spring had turned the desert briefly green, Flint heard horses approaching. He stepped onto the porch, hand instinctively moving toward his colt before he recognized the riders. Dakota led a small group. Cochise and 3 Apache warriors rode as escort, but it was the bundle she carried against her chest that made Flint's breath catch. Wrapped in the same blanket from the photograph, but real now, solid, present. She dismounted with practiced ease despite her precious cargo, and Flint approached his heart, pounding harder than it had during any gunfight. "Marshal Harrigan," Dakota said formally, but her eyes were warm, alive in a way he'd never seen before. "I bring your daughter." She pulled back the blanket. The baby's eyes opened dark and alert, already curious about this new world she'd entered. She didn't cry, just studied Flint's face with solemn intensity, as if deciding whether this stranger was worthy of her attention. Flint extended one calloused finger rough from years of handling reins and rifles. The baby's hand shot out and gripped it with surprising strength, refused to let go. "Hello, Catherine," he whispered, his voice breaking on the name. "Welcome home." Dakota smiled, and it transformed her face. "She has your stubborn grip, and your refusal to cry when crying would be easier." "Apache trait," Cochise said with dry humor, dismounting beside his sister. "We teach them early. This one will be fierce." "Like her mother's," Flint said quietly, looking at Dakota. "Both the Catherine she was named for and the Dakota who would raise her." Dakota stepped closer, adjusting the baby so both of them could see her clearly. "She's ours now, not yours or mine. Ours, Apache and white, the bridge we talked about." And for the first time in 3 years, standing on his porch, with his daughter's impossibly small hand wrapped around his finger, and Dakota beside him, James Harrigan felt something he'd thought burned away in that fire 3 years ago. Completeness, not happiness. Not yet. Happiness was too fragile a word for what this was, but wholeness. The sense that pieces long scattered were finally impossibly coming back together into something new. He thought about the letter he'd written, about the legacy of people who'd fought for something better, about Doc's belief that justice could work if good people forced it to, about Dakota's refusal to surrender hope even when hope seemed foolish. The future was uncertain. Creed had warned of enemies still out there. The territory remained dangerous. Old hatreds didn't disappear with one trial. But standing in that house built by Apache and settler hands working together, Flint allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, something better was possible. Outside, the stars blazed in the desert sky, ancient and eternal. The wind whispered through sage. Somewhere a coyote called to the moon. And in that moment between night and morning, destruction and creation, past and future, James Harrigan, former fugitive turned marshal, felt something he hadn't felt since the night his world burned. Peace, fragile as glass, temporary as morning dew, but real. And that was enough.